Welcome back to our knowledge exchange workshop titled Restoring Watershed Resilience. Our next speaker is Kris Fischer, who is the Tucannon Fish Habitat Enhancement Project Lead for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation based in Walla Walla, Washington. Kris holds an MS in biology from the University of Nebraska and has over 25 years of experience with on-the-ground habitat restoration and monitoring work. Kris worked in the Upper Klamath Basin for over 15 years and has worked for the past 9+ years in the Tucannon River Basin in southeast Washington. Kris plans and implements large-scale habitat restoration projects, some of which we'll hear about today. And when Kris isn't working, his favorite pastime is fishing for steelhead. Kris, we welcome you and are excited to hear about the Umatilla tribe's work to restore resilience in the Tucannon River Basin. I turn it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Laura, for the introduction. I appreciate that. I'm kind of in a tough spot here. I get to go after Alan and Pete. So, it's always tough to follow up, so I'll do my best. Pete, I just want to congratulate you on your Jim Siddell Award. There's people that you work with in your career, and Jim was one of those. So I just want to say congratulations on that. So anyway, my talk is Rewetting the Sponge, using the Umatilla tribe's river vision to restore resilience in the Tucannon sub-basin. Hopefully the clicker works. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about today's presentation overview. I'm going to take you guys through the Umatilla tribe's river vision, talk a little bit about how we lost resiliency in the first place, take you through a restoration project example on the Tucannon River, 27 and 28, and then talk a little bit about aquatic biota as success criteria. Where is the Tucannon River? The Tucannon River is the map on the right. It's in southeast Washington. The Tucannon is the lowest spring Chinook spawning tributary in the Snake and is located between Lower Monument and Little Goose Dams. The watershed drains approximately 503 square miles. The main channel of the Tucannon River is 58 miles long. The Tucannon River is home to ESA-listed spring and summer Chinook, summer steelhead, bull trout, as well as other critters of interest to the tribes, including freshwater mussels, lamprey, and mountain whitefish. The pictures below show an upper Tucannon landslide that happened in 2022. We talk, about stage 0, and, this is one of those ways we kind of see stage 0 in nature. So it was a small slide. It was in June, and it completely blocked the river for a while. And you can see that it created a lot of slow water habitat, which is something we're really lacking in the Tucannon. And then just, a little bit about my title. So Rewetting the Sponge. So this is one of those things that I've spent, part of my career kind of talking about. Oftentimes, we talk about watersheds, but I think we should talk about watersheds as doing less shedding and acting more like a sponge. So I'm going to try to attempt to show you how we accomplish this. So for those of us working for the Umatilla tribes, we were motivated by the tribe's river vision. The river vision was created in 2008 to guide aquatic habitat management that includes the broader tribal perspective, providing linkages between traditional knowledge and Western science. The interdependence between river vision touchstones is critical to a functioning floodplain and a river that supports first foods. Hydrology is the engine that drives the other touchstones, delivering water, sediment, and organic matter, such as wood, across the floodplain, creating and maintaining conditions necessary for the other touchstones. These punctuated events structure a dynamic range of aquatic habitat features shaped not only by the physical and biological processes, but the interactions and interconnections between those processes. As Alan mentioned, making sure to focus on the importance of natural systems being resilient to disturbance, both natural and unnatural. So the channel processes and forms are still recognizable to the native species that depend on them. Since Brian and Colin's paper in 2013, we have discussed high capacity 2-year bank full channels not being the historic norm or reference. If you're an engineer listening today, please repeat after me. We are not designing 2-year bank full channels anymore. One of the main takeaways from Clear and Thorne in 2013's work is that there are significant ecological differences between floodplain connected stages, the 8, the 0, and the 1, and the incised stages, the 2, the 3, the 3A, and the 4. As we make it around the different evolutionary stages, the Tucannon is mostly stuck in phase 3, looking for help. Next slide, please. If we take a deeper dive conceptually into what makes our rivers resilient, I'm going to take you through some conceptual slides. Before I start this, I needed to give a little shout out to one of my past colleagues, Larry Dunsmore, who really helped spearhead this effort. I just continue to use these slides, so thank you, Larry. But remember, as we look at the template, click this. This is only one channel across a network of channels, and this should exist across the valley. Each of these channels is supported by riparian vegetation, including sedges, rushes, willows, and cottonwoods. Roots from these plants stabilize the stream bank, providing the necessary roughness or create pools, riffles, and meanders. Large woody debris is important for the channels and the fish habitat. In addition, let's see if my slide's going to work here. In addition to keeping multiple channels narrow, riparian vegetation provides shade, keeping water temperatures low in the summertime. Multiple narrow channels allow for overbank flow during high water events. Overbank flow is important because it decreases stream power in the channel, recharges the aquifer, stores sediment, provides nutrients for riparian vegetation, as well as keeping the water table in proximity, close proximity. Here you'll see an example in the Tucannon showing large wood and floodplain connection. Next, I'm going to move us to how our rivers have changed. Think of how our east side rivers changed over time. The early 19th century saw large-scale straightening, leveeing, riparian tree removal, which has reduced resiliency in these systems. Straightening caused widespread channel changes, including increased slope and stream power. In many places, the channel became over-widened and simplified. There we go. There's a delay in my clicker, so I apologize. Here's the old channel trace for comparison. Consequences of this widening include increased stream temperature, decreased channel complexity, and fish habitat. Frequency of overbank flows decrease. Oversized channels hold larger flows as the channel becomes unstable. Floodplain function decreases, less sediment and nutrient storage for riparian plants. Water is cut off from the floodplain and less water is available during the summertime. So this next slide shows differences between the old channel and the new channel as we go through the channel evolution. Here's the same picture in the Tucannon where gravel was removed by by stream power during the 25-year event. As you can see, the river channel dropped about 3 feet in this reach. As we move from stage 0 to stage 3 conditions, depending on topography and other conditions, other factors, channels often insize themselves into the floodplain. As channels begin to convey more flood flows, stream power increases and the channel bed causes the channel to incise into the floodplain. Rivers that lose floodplain connectivity lose water storage, and the channel the channel can now hold most of the flows during our high flow events. The channel now, the increased incision causes further drying out of the floodplain and reduces groundwater storage. Here's another example from the Tucannon with a disconnected floodplain without the riparian forest. So just to kind of showing you kind of how the steps that we go through as these rivers fall apart and lose their resilience. I hope that was helpful. There was quite a delay on the clicker, so I apologize. So now for an introduction to the project, the Tucannon River Project Area 2728. This project was completed in 2023. This private lands project allowed us to think a little larger than usual, as we were not forced to provide a levee to protect the farm fields. The new landowner was interested in both continued ag and farm fish and wildlife. The blue outline is the pre-project ordinary high water mark. The brown is the wood that was added to the main channel. The red is existing levees, and the yellow is fill areas, and the orange is cut areas. In this project, the landowner is willing to give up 7 acres of farmland to return the return it to floodplain in exchange for improved irrigation infrastructure. This is a big deal as we don't get new floodplains very often, so we were challenged to make the best use out of 7 acres in the planning and permitting phase. So how do we do this, right? So this is the question. So for us working in the Tucannon, we looked at the geomorphic timeline in the Tucannon to see what flows we saw most often. And what flows do we need to get water on the floodplain each year? How long do we want the floodplain to get wet? You know, how many months or days? And what makes the most sense? So if we look at this graph, over the last 27 years, only 13 years have seen flows above the 2-year return interval. Remember, Brian and Colin said the 2-year return interval wasn't the bankful norm. So we need to design channels to overtop at the low mean winter flow, which is really about 100 CFS in the Tucannon, and which is that little bitty box that I just added to the graph. So this will make sure that we see an uplift in floodplain connectivity. Remember, overwinter survival overwinter survival of spring Chinook is a problem in the Tucannon. These fish need floodplains to help them survive. So as part of this process, we hired Wolf Water Resources and created a 2D HEC-RAS model for the project area to help with project permitting and design. We can use these models to communicate the anticipated uplift in the metrics and make sure that we are meeting our design goals. The first model shows the changes in wetted area, think floodplain connection, at the low winter flow, which again is 100 CFS in the Tucannon. The black outline shows the pre-construction condition. The lighter blue hash line shows the increased wetted area at low winter flows. This hydraulic model shows the proposed changes in wetted area at the 2-year flow, which is 792 CFS. Again, with the same colors for pre-restoration and post-restoration. The main idea is that we can learn a lot about the project using hydraulic models as a tool in our toolbox. And it really helps to communicate these things to our permitters, you know, so they get to see before we do the project what it's going to look like and what to expect. The next metric we address is increased stream power or stream velocity. or I should probably say the reduction in stream power caused by floodplain restoration. In this model, you will see the changes in velocity post-project at the 2-year interval. Again, making sure that we are reducing stream power. If you look at the little graphic on the right, you'll see that the blue colors are increases in velocity and the green colors are decreases in velocity. And one of the things that we're really hoping for is to decrease the velocity in that old main channel that you'll see there. So this helps us to reassure ourselves that the work we're doing is making a difference. The next model shows changes in the main stem Tucannon velocity at the 10-year flow, which is a higher flow than we typically think about, but allows us to make sure that we're decreasing velocities across the floodplain in the light green and reductions in the main channel. While decreases are around 1 feet per second, this is significant in this reach for the lower Tucannon. You know, we're on private property, and as we move downriver, you know, we change property bounds. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't increasing flooding on the property lower or right below us. So here's an overview of the completed downstream reach, with the red line showing the pre-existing channel and the dark and light blue showing the post-project conditions. You will see where we've placed channel fill, constructed side channels, and placed wood, which increased channel spanners. You will also see from the pre-project and post-project metrics, we placed over 700 trees, doubled the number of pools, increased the channel length while reconnecting the floodplain. The overview shows the reconnection of the 7 acres that I showed earlier and includes an additional 250 logs, reconnected another 7,445 meters of channel length. Again, we focused the floodplain reconnection at this low winter flow at approximately 100 CFS to make the floodplain active during most winters. The next slide shows pre-project velocities during the 1-year event at approximately 215 CFS. As you spread the 215 CFS across the site, it decreases velocity and stream power, providing an uplift to habitat suitability for overwintering salmonids. The other important part of habitat suitability index is stream depth. As you can see, stream depths have decreased during the project, but should start to be more variable as we see high flows over this site. Remember, last year was the first year the project was completed and the Tucannon's high flow was only 308 CFS. While I've shown you how we use physical data to plan our restoration projects, I want to end by talking about aquatic biota as a success criteria. Remember, if the other touchstones are working correctly, they should positively influence aquatic biota. Cottonwood regeneration is directly connected to floodplain connectivity, making them a good indicator of success. If the flow recession rate is greater than the root development in May and June, you will not see cottonwood regeneration. Does this sound like a good criteria for floodplain connectivity? So I went out a couple weeks ago and took some pictures of Project Area 2728. And, you know, we always see these cottonwood sprouts, you know, in the summertime, but oftentimes they don't make it because the projects aren't connected to the floodplain. So this kind of helps us understand that, you know, at least at this site, these cottonwoods are going to be fine because they made it through the summer. And just remember, it's only been through one winter season. So the peak flow was only 308 CFS, so which is really about a 1.2 year return. So pretty small returns last year. So just a quick shout out to our Tucannon implementer work group. It takes all of the implementers to make the necessary uplift to reverse the extinction of spring chinook and the Tucannon. It is important that we call out our Tucannon landowners who are critical part of this work, and without them, we would continue to struggle. The Tucannon is about 2/3 private owned, so we rely on our Tucannon landowners greatly. So thanks again. I appreciate the time to share the results of the past several years of work in the Tucannon. I encourage you to check out the TucannonRiver.org website, or more specifically, the Tucannon web map. Before I take questions, I want to include a short video or a moment of Zen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kris, for a really great talk. Such an interesting project. You were in the enviable position of having this agricultural land to work with, and I imagine many viewers with us today are, jealous and inspired by the project you've shown us. And thank you for that moment of Zen. I got goosebumps just like I did the first time I previewed that a few days ago. That's, lovely. Thank you. We've got, no surprise, we've got lots of activity in Slido with some really interesting questions, some of which are sort of a more kind of higher level, and some are getting into the nitty gritty and really wanting to understand how you executed this project.
Okay.
So
Good.
let's start. I'm going to start with the top question. It seems to be hovering there. Has there been any concern that by reactivating this sort of area of the floodplain, relic channels, expanding the wetted channel area, that there may be reduced flow depths or periods of either high water temperature or inadequate main stem flows in summer months?
It's definitely been a concern of ours. As that floodplain starts to revegetate itself, we were really trying to be careful not to have water out there too long during the summertime. So those channels are really made so that water comes off those channels, in the summertime. A couple of them will remain, did remain flowing this summer. So it's definitely a concern of ours, something we definitely look at. And, the 2D model really helps us kind of predict that. So it's just one of those things that, at least kind of reassures, a project that, that we're doing the right thing. So.
Has there been some follow-up monitoring that's going to be carried out to just look to see whether the model predictions are matching what you're seeing on the ground, and kind of having a check on flow levels at these dry summer conditions?
We will. So, one of the things we do in the Tucannon is we have a pretty robust monitoring program. So we've got several LiDAR data sets, and we look at change detection throughout the whole basin based on those LiDAR data sets. So we flew our last LiDAR data set in 2020 after a 25-year event. The next LiDAR data set will be collected, after our next, high flow event of at least a 5-year event. So at that time, we'll take another look and see where we're at with floodplain connectivity and stuff like that in the Tucannon.
Great. The top question is sort of a follow-up again with the sort of monitoring post-project conditions. Was the project big enough to impact flow regime downstream, with the area acting more like a sponge, literally holding the water, absorbing the water more? Are you tracking that, or plan to?
Yeah, so we are tracking that, but we mostly track it based on vegetation. It's just one of those indicators that we're using on this project. We've done wells and stuff like that in the past, and while those things are really informative, it's a big time sink to do that monitoring. So we're really trying to use the biotic to really tell us what things are going on out there. So
Great. For project funding purposes, would you mind sharing a ballpark budget of how to undertake such an amazing project of this size and scope, including the cost for hydrological modeling that you assume you needed for the permit applications?
Well, that's a great question. I'm trying to remember all the expenses. So it was done over about 4 years. So I think we spent about $3 million on this project. We added, about 1,000 trees to this project area. So, obviously some of that cost is acquiring trees, and then also we did some dirt removal out there on the floodplain, trying to balance, our high spots and our low spots. So, we ended up moving some materials there. So I think that's about what this project cost. Sometimes you're forced to kind of cut these up into chunks because of your in-water work window, and that's not always the most efficient way to do these projects because you've got expenses with crews showing up, each year and stuff like that. So I think overall, with the irrigation efficiencies and stuff like that, I think the site, at least has enough space for the river to do what it wants to do out there, but then also, it preserves ag out there and increases, water availability to ag. So we're excited about that.
Great. Could you I guess expand a little bit more on that water availability for ag, which ties to the top question here, because it was mentioned the 7 acres of private land
Yeah.
were provided in exchange for this improved irrigation. So where's the water? Where is that water coming from?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when we first showed up out here, there was a ditch that irrigated the property, has a water right of about 11 CFS each year, which is a rather large water right in the Tucannon. Base flow in the Tucannon is about 60 CFS. So we were pretty excited about the possibility of making irrigation more efficient on this project area. And so the way we did that is we worked with BPA and we went through some of their energy efficiency programs. And we came up with an irrigation system that was both efficient with electricity, but also efficient with water. So this is the first year that the system's ran. It's got a meter on it, so we're going to try to project into the future, how much water we'll use and what that water savings looks like. And hopefully that'll be saved in stream.
Great. This workshop, we're often encouraging speakers to reflect on lessons learned. What might you have done differently that you could share to people who may be looking at planning their own projects to draw on on that valuable insight? So this top question ties to that. Are there considerations or reflections that you have now that the project's completed that you wish you'd known in advance?
Yeah, I think, every project you do, you always ask yourself, was that enough, right? Was it enough wood, or did we get the floodplain connected enough to really make a difference? And, I think you always learn those things. Each project, I think, in the Tucannon, we've done a little better and a little better each year as we've learned. And I think, the monitoring has been a big part of that, so that we learn from our projects. One of the challenges we had in this project is it started during COVID, and we hoped to do, the whole in-channel work during 1 year, but because of the COVID year, then that stopped us. So we had to divide that year into 2 years, which again adds costs, So if I had it again, it wouldn't be during a COVID year. So.
Well, you certainly made the best of that situation, being able to carry that project through despite those disruptions. Top question that's really specific to the project implementation. Can you describe the specifics of how you created the reconnection? Where did you source the material? How structures were built? What types of structures? So I guess, sharing some of the real technical details of the project for folks. Mm-hmm.
So we started out doing the project, in the main channel. So the first 2 years were main channel work. And that allowed us to kind of learn from the project a little bit. And as we were out there, there's always spots that LiDAR shows, but then there's other spots that maybe were shaded by trees and some other things. So you have these old levee remnants, which were really just push-up berms. And we were able to utilize a bunch of that stuff to do some channel fills. And so we were trying to match, the water out on the floodplain with the channel elevations in the old main channel. So what we did is we went through and we removed all those high spots, and then we filled those low spots. And so then we added wood, to make sure that we had enough roughness on the floodplain to reduce any, down cutting or anything else we would see during our high flows. And that's why this over 1 mile of project area got over 1,000 trees, which is more than what we usually do. So as we moved out into the floodplain, that final year, it was becoming pretty apparent, kind of what those elevations needed to be out there. And just, this project's never really had any levees on it, so it's had water across this, during every high flow. So there were kind of some natural levees and some natural high spots that existed out there, even though it was an ag. So we went through and we removed some of that stuff. We tried to match the high marks with the low marks and tried to come up with kind of an evening of the floodplain. And then we added lots of wood out in the floodplain. There's basically 2 layers of wood in the floodplain. There's a buried layer to provide enough roughness so the river wouldn't cut a new channel out there. But then there's also wood on the surface to really make sure that, as we get water out there, it doesn't capture it as the main channel out there before we're ready for that with vegetation. One of the real surprises is just how quickly vegetation has come back to this project area. We have a long 5-year planting ahead of us, but vegetation has really taken off there. And I think that's mostly because, that sponge is wet again and there's water on that floodplain. So we're excited. This is 1 year, so just, there'll be more years to see this project kind of develop and mature. So.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I can see from the activity on Slido that there's many people who are interested to follow the project, and as the vegetation reestablishes and the continued success of it. Thank you so much for sharing your project. It's certainly inspiring and inspired a lot of questions and interest. We're going to in keeping to the schedule for today, we're going to move on to our next talk, but remember, these questions get saved and we'll do our best to get to at least some of them during our panel discussion, which is just going to follow our next speaker. So I'll turn the mic over to Jason to introduce him.